to a bunch of folks about their use of that area and its potential relationship to tidal energy installations.
Great. Thanks, Isham. Okay, so how many people here have heard of tidal energy? Raise your hand. Everybody. Okay, great. I guess I've been talking a lot. So this is a shot within my study area that's Seymour Narrows. So basically this summer I did, as Isham said, I did a bunch of interviews in Campbell River in relation to some proposed tidal energy developments there. So the outline for my talk, I'll just give a brief overview of the state of the industry, both at home and abroad, some of the potential for it overall in BC, why we might want to consider tidal energy in BC, and then go over my research and analysis. So this is a slide of the UK. Some of the proposed or already developed tidal energy sites are outlined in red, or orange, I guess. There's about 5 sites that have been approved already. The largest of which is called Maygen. That's here in northern Scotland. So that's going to be the first array scale tidal energy facility. They're aiming to install, I think, 4 turbines next year, and they're taking kind of a phased research and development approach to it. There's been a lot of research on sort of single turbine deployments and their impacts on marine life and so on, but there's very little, if any, research on cumulative impacts. So if you put 300 turbines in the water, what's it going to do? This is an example of one of the turbine designs that's being used in the area. This little guy down here is about 2 meters tall, so the overall height of the device is about 26 meters. And it sits on the seafloor, and this is a 1 megawatt device, so that's about enough for 420 odd homes in BC when the tide is running sufficiently. Here's another example. This is an open hydro turbine. So you can see the dimensions there. It's quite heavy. It's probably one of the largest commercial scale turbines in development and use right now. It's being trialed in France right now. You'll notice the difference, one of the main differences is the shrouded rotor. So the rotor tips are covered in a shroud, so this is arguably safer for impacts to marine life and would probably minimize snagging as well from lines and so on. I'll talk more about that later. One of the nice things about this technology is it's scalable. So the guys who build this turbine have a much smaller version that generates less power. So it can theoretically be, you can build, various sizes of devices. In terms of impacts to marine life, the turbines are generally very slow turning, so about 15 or 20 RPM. So that's, 1 full revolution every kind of 3 or 4 seconds. So the risk of chopping up fish is actually pretty slim to nil. So this is more back home. So this is the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia here. This is called Minas Passage. So that turbine you saw on the previous slide is actually slated to be tested here next year. There's a turbine test facility based on shore here, and they have 4 test beds right in this red bit here. The scale is in meters per second in velocity, so this eddy here has energy levels similar to a hurricane. It's very powerful. And so basically Nova Scotia is kind of very seriously committed to tidal energy. They want to have about 40% renewable energy capacity in their grid by 2020. It's a very lofty goal. They've introduced feed-in tariffs and community feed-in tariffs for tidal energy. So they're attracting a lot of investment. And the International Conference on Ocean Energy is being held in Halifax this fall. Okay, thanks. This is BC's potential. So there's about 3,500 megawatts of theoretical capacity in and around Vancouver Island and the south coast. To put that in perspective, Site C, the proposed Site C dam is about 1,100 megawatts. That number is theoretical. That's like if you put a fence of turbines across the entire channel and took up the whole area. So realistically, that's not feasible. Research to date indicates that we can harness maybe 10 to 20% of that amount without having adverse ecological effects, you know, slowing down the overall tidal stream and so on. Of note, in Campbell River specifically, these two big red dots, which are in my study area, add up to about 1,100 megawatts of theoretical power as well. So just briefly, why would we want to, you know, consider tidal energy in BC? We have oodles of hydroelectric energy. It supplies 90% of our province. This is a graph I pulled from a BC Hydro study. It shows some climate change projections and their effect on the Strathcona watershed, which was also in my study area. Strathcona provides about 200 megawatts and is, you know, about 10% of Vancouver Island's power. The effects of climate change on that watershed, the reservoir inflows during the summer months are projected to take a very large hit by the year 2050. And that's because we're already seeing a loss of snowpack. This past summer, in fact, the reservoir levels were near record lows because the snowpack levels were about 35% of the historical mean. So it's already appears to be taking effect. So more about my study area. There's Campbell River. There's Vancouver Island. My study area is on a piece of water called the Inside Passage, which basically runs up the inside of Vancouver Island. It's a very busy marine shipping route. There's tugs that go to Alaska, cruise ships. You can see anywhere from 5 to 10 cruise ships go through there a day during the summer months. So it's a very busy area, known as the Marine Highway. Lots of fishing boats and mining and forestry and so on. So it's quite a busy passage. As well, it's a major migratory route for salmon, and then you also have orca and humpback whales moving through there. And it's self-regarded as the salmon fishing capital of the world. So there you go. Here's my study area in detail. So I was looking at between Separation Head and Cape Mudge. Here's the city of Campbell River. Here's the Strathcona watershed here. So it's all very nicely compacted. This little piece in here is called Canoe Pass, and then these are the Seymour Narrows. So this is the bulk of the energy is here and here. And I'll just briefly mention Canoe Pass. It's received regulatory approval. It is a tidal energy pilot project. The basic idea is to open up this causeway and restore the natural tidal flows in the area. This is a man-made causeway from back when they blew up Ripple Rock. It's a nice project because the transmission lines are right there. So that's received regulatory approval, and they started breaking ground on it this summer. So we'll see if that gets anywhere. So my study, what did I do? These are some of the groups that I interviewed. I conducted about 36 interviews in total. And I basically talked with First Nations and stakeholders in the Campbell River area. I selected interviewees based on their commercial, recreational, or cultural use of the waterway that is being considered. So you can see all the groups here. So small marine operators, large tugboat companies, some of the city managers, the aquaculture industry, which is quite developed up there, as well as the fishing community, which is prolific. There's commercial, although there was no commercial fishing actually in my study area, I still interviewed a few of the commercial guys just to get some perspective. And then as well, some government and regulatory agencies, Coast Guard and Department of Fisheries and Oceans provided some interesting feedback. So these are my research questions. Basically, what and where are the specific marine usage areas within my study area? I measured this using iPad and IGIS, which is a neat little app where you can show people a map and they can draw on where they use, where their areas of interest and value are. And as well, so the second question was, what are some of the perceived risks and benefits of stakeholders and First Nations surrounding tidal energy? So okay, thank you. I measured this using interview techniques and provided a brief information briefing on what tidal energy is, where we get our power from in BC, and so on. And then the final question is related to where stakeholders perceive potential conflict areas were surrounding tidal energy developments in the area. So this was quite interesting because the BC Ministry of Forest, Lands and Natural Resources has actually issued investigative use permits within these areas near Campbell River. So at the end of my interview, I was able to show the stakeholders the permit areas and say, okay, this is proposed for development, or it's being investigated for development. And I partnered with Hemera on this project, who had been contracted by SRM Projects out in Nanaimo, who's an actual tidal energy developer, and they want to look at developing tidal energy here. So they gave me some details on what the projects might look like. You know, the turbines are at the bottom of the ocean. There's a bunch of details that I won't bore you with all of them, but so it's kind of neat because I could actually show them where the permit sites are. These were the southern permit areas here outlined in red. So here's the city of Campbell River. This is a very, very busy waterway here. In particular, you have a ferry route, numerous marinas on here, a lot of recreational and commercial boat traffic. Cape Mudge Indian Band Reservation is here, and then the Campbell River itself with a lot of salmon fishing goes on in here. So it's quite a neat waterway. Preliminary results. So I did some token questions relating to risks and benefits around tidal energy, perceived risks and benefits. Some of the kind of the top basically some of the top most highly valued potential benefits of tidal energy was people didn't want to see more construction of large dams. They also valued a lot the water levels in the local reservoir. I introduced the idea that there is a potential for, if there was significant tidal energy development in the area, it could displace a little bit of hydroelectric generation in their watershed, thereby conserving water. That was very highly valued to them. You know, you got to temper that with the fact that their reservoir levels were at record low this summer, or close to record low, and it was a very dry year for them. Risk perceptions were largely stakeholder specific. So fishermen were concerned about the effect on migrating salmon. Generally, whale watchers were concerned about the effect on cetaceans, generally speaking. Let's see what else. The marine traffic community, so the tugboats, were very concerned about impeding shipping traffic, and as well, generally speaking, there was some concern about if there was installation activities to take place in the Seymour Narrows, they would have to do so at slack water, which is a very important and busy time for marine traffic in the area. All the large traffic typically aims for slack water, which is maybe a 60 to 90 minute window, which they can all shoot through the Narrows at once. So if the tidal energy developers were to be doing some installation or maintenance activities, it would likely take up one of those slack water windows, which would affect the transit of goods and services through the area. Let's see. As well, some of the major conflicts that were highlighted by fishermen were downriggers. So sport fishermen would go out, in the hundreds in the summertime and use these downrigger balls, which are basically a 5 to 10 pound lead weight on the end of a line. And they would basically, the way they would fish is they would drop that weight to the bottom, even in like 200 feet of water, and then reel it up a little bit. So that downrigger ball's dragging them very close to the bottom, and that's how they caught their fish. Okay, so that was, very high. They were very concerned about that snagging on a tidal turbine and what effect that would have. It was a real sort of risk to marine safety, especially in a current flow area. The other one was tug tow cables. So this is a tug and a large barge, and their tow cables kind of dangle down a bit. And in high current areas, there's sometimes the barge can move around and the tow cable can droop down. And in extreme circumstances, in an emergency, they may have to dump their tow cable. So if they lose power in the rapids or have a fire on board or something like that, their first reaction would be to dump their tow cable. So then you have this tow cable coiling up on the bottom, so was certainly a concern. We did identify some specific areas within my study area that there was a higher risk of this happening. So that was quite useful. And then finally, the Narrows themselves. This is a nice picture of them. It's a hazardous piece of water. There's a lot of energy there, but there's a lot of risk of things going wrong there as well. There's some questions around technical feasibility. A lot of the people I interviewed were sort of seasoned marine people and said, this, how the heck are you going to do this? Like, how can we put things underwater in these rapids? Because the currents are so strong. So conclusions, spatial component was very useful. Subjects' risk perceptions really kind of went up once they saw the permit areas themselves, so that was kind of interesting. Once you draw some lines on a map and say, this is where it's being proposed, this is what it might look like, then some people had more of a visceral reaction to it. We got a sense of, some of the real risks to the turbines. I got a sense of some of the real risks to the turbines, from tow cables and downrigger cables, things that could really physically snag on the turbines. And as well, some of the perceived risks on the part of the community, some of the potential benefits that they saw, and some of the things that they valued in the area. Overall, it seemed that the stakeholders and First Nations were cautiously supportive of the proposed projects. So the next steps will be to map some of the usage areas and the conflict areas using GIS, and I'll be presenting at the International Conference on Ocean Energy in Halifax in November, and then might be doing some off-grid tidal energy analysis next year, looking at off-grid sites. Just some of my people who have helped me along the way. And this slide's for Hattie, because it has a lot of details on it, and he requested. So Hattie, depths are in meters. The scale here is 1,000 yards for this arrow. There's some energy details there for you. So. Okay, thank you. Samir, yes. Yeah. So does BC have a feed-in tariff for tidal energy, and what's the chances of getting one in the next few years? Yeah, there's not one in place. The chances of getting one in the next few years, I'm not sure. I don't think a specific feed-in tariff for tidal energy, I wouldn't imagine that happening. There might be some deals struck within the standing offer program for paying a set rate for a small tidal energy project, but yeah, I don't know too much about what their internal politics are on that. Does it fall in the existing SOP? I'm not sure on that. Hattie's raising his hand. The Canoe Pass project, from what I understand, the last I heard was that it has received, BC Hydro's agreed to provide the infrastructure for it, but that they haven't agreed to pay for it yet. So, do you have anything to add on that, Hattie, or? Up to 1 megawatt. Okay. Yeah, they're cutting a lot of them too, aren't they? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so like pressure changes in the water pressure? Yeah. I don't know enough to answer your question directly. I do know that some of the biologists I spoke with said that, you know, salmon are quite pressure sensitive. But I mean, yeah, I don't know enough about it. I don't think there's a lot of pressure change, but I don't know enough about it to answer for sure. So. That's a great question. I think it's a bit of that prospecting mentality, and that's the most power on highest power density anywhere on the coast. So that, I mean, that the overall study area is 1,100 megawatts, which is just over a quarter of BC's total theoretical potential for tidal energy. So it's also, in terms of cost of development, you know, you have an established sort of marine industrial base right there. You have road access, you have grid connection already there. So there's a fair amount of infrastructure right there. You know, so the distance from the resource to civilization is very small. So I think that's definitely factored into it. Yes, Kai. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean it's I think, yeah, I mean a coastal community is going to have some boating activity for sure. The size of the coastal community and the sort of the size of the port there certainly affects it. I mean, Campbell River is sort of a major port for the commercial fishing fleet. There's also a ferry route there. They were bringing in cruise ships there for a little bit, so it is a busy, a very, very busy port. But I think you could find some other coastal communities, perhaps around Port Alice or Port Hardy, that would be less busy in terms of marine traffic. That route, I mean, every northbound ship through the Inside Passage has to go through those narrows. So it's every cruise ship, every tug and tow, you know, because the advantage of that route is that it's protected from weather, right? The only other option is to go outside the island. So that site in particular is very busy because of that reason. Yes, Keely. I think it's maybe partly because of that, but I mean, it's a very much a working community as well that has been hard hit. Their mill closed a couple of years ago, so they lost a lot of their tax base and a lot of jobs. So I think they're cautiously in favor of any resource-based project that can provide economic stimulus to the area. But having said that, a lot of these people's livelihood resides around marine resources, right? So the fishing community in particular, and the ecotourism in the summertime there is huge. So I think they kind of had mixed reactions. They certainly wanted to see their natural ecosystem services preserved, but as well have some industrial kind of development that could provide some real long-term jobs as well. Thank you.